It reminds me of like real corny metaphor, but like in Inside Out, when she goes into the little girl's memories and they're all yellow and happy, and sadness starts touching them all. Like, oh my God, the memories are ruined. And that was real for us. Like, every memory was tainted for so long. And there are some I think that still are, because there's a reality to them. But there is now an ability to look back and say, and even looking at some of these questions, like, what was our relationship with our mom? It was still really positive. There were a lot of hard things that happened for us growing up, but she was an excellent mom and she laid everything on the table for us every single day. And no amount of sadness or addiction or any sort of whatever emotion comes with this story can change that. And so I think it's taken a lot of work for us to parse through all of that. I do think that's where we are at this point.
I'm Candice. My dad died back in 1991 from a cocaine overdose, and all my life I've never met anyone else who lost a parent to addiction or substance abuse. So I started Kids of Overdose, a show where we hear personal accounts from survivors. In this episode, we talk to two sisters, Morgan and Taylor. They lost their mom to fentanyl poisoning, and they share what she was like, how they found out, and their journeys through grief. You'll hear Morgan start explaining first. Thanks again for listening to Kids of Overdose. Can you tell me a little bit about your mom, what she was like?
There's kind of two versions of her. There's the pre-addiction version and the version that she turned into after she fell pretty deep into her addiction. And I think that's something that we struggled with because around the time that we both were in college, we felt like we didn't know who our mom was anymore. So when we were growing up, she was like a pretty happy, generally positive person, had a lot of friends, loved to be around family. She was the aunt who took everybody in, so we had a few cousins who lived with us over the years. She just was always there to lend a hand, and then after she fell into her addiction, which we didn't really know about at the start, she became the shell of herself, didn't wanna be social with anybody, very erratic moods, very unpredictable, and so she just was the opposite of the person she had been our whole lives.
How old are you when things shifted?
Maybe high school? It's so hard to so when we were in high school, she got her first knee surgery, which as we've done the backward detective work since she died, we figured it might have happened after that first knee surgery where she got access to opioids. And then she got access to benzodiazepines as she got diagnosed for her anxiety and depression. And that was all around high school for us.
Yeah.
Maybe late middle school.
She got her knee replacement when I was a freshman, so 14, 15, we're only 17 months apart,
And then she died when I was 28.
and I was 27.
How did you cope with all those changes happening in your home?
I think the way we describe it to people is it was so subtle over such a long period of time that it was enough to make us think it wasn't as serious as it was. So, like, we slowly lost her over the years. It wasn't just like a light switch. I think the other thing is, I think us moving out once we graduated from high school, like when we were still living with her, we were very close. We were able to almost keep bringing her back almost, I
Okay.
think. And then when we left for college, I think then it became a deeper addiction and more of her coping mechanism for she was a single mom over her life. And so
Eh.
I think I
I think the other thing that's probably not all that unique to our story is that she struggled with mental illness long before she struggled with addiction, and so there are a lot of things that I think we were probably in our 20s before we realized that doesn't happen to everybody. Other people's lives don't look this way. Other people's moms don't do X, Y, and Z. And we say that with the understanding that she was doing the best she could at every given moment. but that her best was not always great. And so I think for us, we thought the mental illness was getting progressively worse, co-occurring with that addiction. And so there were a lot of things that as we look back, I can say, oh, that is like a hallmark of addiction. But I didn't know that because I thought it was normal and I thought everybody's family did those things. And so it's really hard when you're in that situation as a child to understand like things could look different in other families.
You were 27 and 28 when she passed away. How did you find out about that?
So the week leading up to her death was this wild ride of her calling us and telling us she was, spiraling and not doing well. She had been dismissed from work temporarily. Like her bosses essentially were like, something's not right. Take some time off, go to the doctor, figure out what's happening. Again, our story's a little unique in that we didn't actually know she was addicted to opioids and benzos. We knew she at times had misused them, but we didn't really know like our mom is an active addiction and getting pills illegally and all of that.
Also didn't know much about addiction, period. Everything we know from hindsight, we learned because of her death. So we were just like, oh, she's using pills. Weird. That's weird. It wasn't like it
Yeah.
didn't tick off anything in our brains.
She's calling us a lot and kind of like you said that she called you and sounded like she had marbles in her mouth. Then there was a period where we hadn't heard from her for about 12 hours. And after so many weird things that week, I drove up to Richmond, Virginia, where she was living. And I ended up waiting until the morning because I got in late, stayed at a family member's house. And I had to do a wellness check. So I had to call the police because she wasn't answering. And we still hadn't heard from her from that point on. And so the police officers came, got into her apartment and did a wellness check and found her. So I was on site in the apartment and then called and had to tell everyone. And at that point, we didn't know exactly what had happened. But again, our initial thought was it's got to be pills, even though we didn't know she was in active addiction. But I knew in my heart pills had to have been it.
Yeah, there were just enough stories from even in just maybe, let's say from ages 15 to 25, there were enough instances where pills factored in that we knew that was the answer. Now, that first day, Taylor called me at 9 a.m. And that first day, I don't think we used the word overdose. We just said something happened with her meds. By 12 hours later, we were like, yep, this was an overdose. And we feel the police had confirmed forensically, they said it did not look like a suicide. Her blow dryer was plugged in. She had her Bluetooth in her ear. There was like food in the fridge. And typically, people who are going to take their own lives try to clean everything up so that someone doesn't have to come in and do that. So they assuaged that for us. And so there wasn't really any option left. She didn't have heart problems. We knew it wasn't a heart attack. There were a lot of things we could rule out. So pretty quickly we were like, okay, this is what it is. And then had to figure out what that meant.
That was probably a shock to you, right? Because it doesn't seem like you ever expected something like that to ever happen. How did you take that and like the stigmas that come with that?
So 3 months before our mom died, started working at an addiction treatment center, totally like
Friends.
by chance. I was a grant writer and found a job at an addiction treatment center. And so in those 3 months had learned just enough to understand, I think, the grace and empathy that needed to come along with it. I'm not going to pretend like we handled that perfectly throughout the whole journey, but we didn't really shy away from it. It was, this is what happened to our mom, and we're going to talk about it because it was very clear to us in the week before she died. We tried really hard to protect her dignity. She didn't want her family to know she was struggling. We had a cousin in town and we were trying to convince her to go stay with our cousin, and she didn't want them to know, she didn't want them to see her like that. And so we had went this whole so much of her life trying to protect her that she ended up dead. And like, I, it was in her death that we were like, we're not doing this anymore. We're not, it's not a hit to her dignity that this happened to her. And I don't think we really understood that until we lost her, that there is a way to honor her and honor her memory well and tell the truth about what happened, because there are a lot of other people struggling and a lot of other kids going through this with their parents who have not died yet, who need to understand that their parents aren't purposely trying to harm them and they aren't purposely trying to cause them pain, but that there's something much deeper going on. And I think that was what we really, by the grace of God, resonated with the most in that moment, was that none of this was on purpose or her fault, but that she was ultimately very ill and didn't get the help that she needed.
Now you don't have to keep a lie. You don't have to hide anything. You just have it all in the open. Do you think that your experiences through the grieving process have differed or were similar to each other?
Lot of similarities. I think we've gone through phases where things have been different. I know, Morgan, you always say that you experience anger.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time in the anger phase for
And I didn't really be, I really think I was too sad to be angry. And then you were saying
yes.
you were too angry to be sad. We were
Yeah.
like on different ends of that. But I think with sharing her story, we were always on the same page. She died because she didn't feel like she could tell anyone because of her shame and stigma. So we're going to break that. That's not what we're going to do because that killed her ultimately. We found 3 treatments in her brochures in her purse that she had gotten from a doctor where she died. I don't know what she was doing with those and if she was going to call the places, but the last time we had talked to her, she was like, I refuse to leave work. I can't leave work. I've got to keep going. And I think she was really ashamed. I don't know that she would have walked into a treatment center.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is, right, she had those brochures, which means she had gone to the doctor the week she died because that was one of the mandates for her job. And so if she had those brochures, the doctor had to have given them to her, which means they had this conversation. And she didn't tell us. When she told us about the doctor's office, she was like, "Oh, I don't know, nothing, they said nothing's going on." And we were like, "That's weird because everything is wrong right now with you." And so if she was going to have told anyone, it would have been us. Like Jean Taylor said earlier, we were her life. She really, this was the one secret she had from us. And I think that speaks volumes. And so it's an unanswered question for us for sure. Would she have gone to treatment? Did she make those phone calls? We don't know. And ultimately, it doesn't really matter because the end result didn't change.
That must have been really hard for her to keep that secret, especially for so many years.
It caused her to cut like everyone out of her life. And I think something that was really beautiful in all of this was all the people that she had cut out still showed up to her funeral. And I'd say 99% of them really showed up for us in the wake of it.
But they all still said, I hadn't talked to her in years.
Yeah.
She cut me out. And she definitely, the couple of people she cut out, we later found out were the ones who were pretty close, if not found out her secret. There were a couple really good friends who she had stopped talking to completely. And we found out later it was because they knew and tried to help her. So it was very weird, the like interwoven pieces of the puzzle people knew. And we always say, if we had all just sat in a room and talked, we could have figured it out.
But everybody wanted to protect her. Everybody really, like, when we talk about the stigma of addiction in the most legitimate, serious way, that is why our mom died. Because my uncle knew this one small sliver of it, but he didn't want to embarrass her by talking to my aunt. But my aunt already knew this other piece of the story, and she didn't want to embarrass mom by talking to us. And it's just that's how the whole thing, it's truly how her life crumbled because everybody knew something, but nobody, I think one, nobody knew what to do with that information. And two, we really weren't a family who talked about those things. We were a family who kept private things private and dealt with our issues like within the nuclear family unit and tried to avoid conflict. And so I think that's the other thing that sort of led to this.
The original question, besides the anger and sadness, I feel like we didn't differ too much. I think we always, in a weird way, are able to support each other. Like when she was angry, I was stable enough to help her. And when I was really
Mhm.
sad, she was always stable enough to help me.
Yeah, we've never had our breakdowns at the same moment, which is super helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have each other for support, which is
Yeah.
really special. Morgan, so you said you had a lot of anger. What were you angry about?
That's a great question. And I think there were a lot of things. I was really angry for a while that all these people knew things and didn't tell us. I was really angry that it was so preventable. Like it was right in front of our face and we missed it. I was really angry at my mom. I was really mad that this is how it ended up. I was mad that she went down this path. I do think it's not the PC thing to say, but I was mad that she chose drugs. I was really mad at her for not doing better. And all of that, I think, is just part of the grieving process because at the same time, I could have said, this is not her fault. She didn't choose this. She didn't want this. But that didn't feel true to me in that moment. It really felt like she had left us and chosen something else over us. My brain couldn't process that without the anger. Like, I had to be angry to understand what actually happened and how we actually got here.
And then, like, all the different stages of grief and, like, what happened, what came next after that anger?
Taylor did, I think, a really good job of facing it head on. Like, she started a grief support group.
2 weeks after she died, I did a grief group through a church. I joined a grass group, but I only went to a couple meetings because then 2020 happened and I was doing therapy, which I know you were too. But yeah, I feel like I was just like so sad, but faced it head on.
I think I also, like, I in the midst, I also got sober 2 months after our mom died, and so I think I also was, like, reckoning with my own issues. I think the avoidance was almost a little bit out of necessity, so I was like, "If I'm gonna do this, I can't, like, dive deep into the grief because I've gotta spend all my energy on making sure I don't drink and I don't go down this same path," which really, if we're being honest, in the first few months, like, I did for Taylor and not for myself, and that's not they say not to do recovery that way, but, like, it was losing my mom and Taylor saying to me, like, "Don't ever make me worry about you this way," and I was like, "Okay, like, I've got some work to do," and so I think I had to put all my eggs in that basket, or else I would have just completely lost it.
Yeah.
You guys have each other, and you had said that while your mom was going through her struggles, nobody really in your family wanted to talk about it or confront it. How are you guys now? Like with your aunts and uncles, and is everybody like on the same page?
It's interesting because when we were like, we are going to be super open, I think at first we didn't get like open backlash to the point of don't do it, but I could see that it was going against like how they had been raised. This is private. This is something that like we're handling as a family. But we have told all of her very close friends and our obviously our family too. This is what we're gonna do. This is how she died. Like, basically, this is our plan, which is to be very transparent with everyone to the point of even on social media. So even our acquaintances from middle school or whoever follows us, like everyone's going to find out about it. And at first, I think they were very like, this isn't how we do things. But we got good support. I also think they were like, these are Linda's girls and they are in charge of her story. People really did let go of the reins and be like, it is your choice, which I'm very thankful for too.
I think too, our family just really didn't understand mental illness, and they had spent a lot of my mom's life telling her like, "Oh, if you just exercise more, you're gonna feel better, and if you do this, you're gonna feel better. You just need to go outside." And I've heard a lot of them say, "I didn't realize, like, how harmful what I said to her was. I didn't realize that it was so much deeper than that." So I think it has opened their eyes to the fact that depression was not a choice. If my mom had a choice, that is not the life she would have picked for herself. But I do think that there's still I don't know that they are as open about it as we are. Stigma is such a big thing to tackle that, like, we also have to find small ways to do it in our everyday, and I think for us, like, it's just this is an easy one where it's if it comes up, we're just gonna share this and let
Yeah.
people see, like, it doesn't have to be shameful. It can be just the truth that it is.
That's such an interesting perspective because when I do think of where does stigma come from, us, right? We could be part of that stigma. And me never bringing it up or talking about it, I'm feeding into that it's something shameful that shouldn't be shared. And for all those years, you don't realize that you're like helping to build that stigma. How has the trauma changed you as a person? And what interesting things have you worked on or do you think have influenced you from your mom's passing?
When I came back to work after my mom died, I was very open with my team about what had happened, and I remember my boss saying to me, "You will either quit this job in 2 weeks or you will be in this field for life. And, like, they're gonna have to drag you out screaming." And I was like, "You're probably right." And I think it's the latter at this point. Like, I don't see another place where I can make as big of an impact, but also feel so personally fulfilled, which is, I think, why a lot of people hate their day jobs because they don't feel like they're impacting anything. And so for me, it just reaffirmed that this is where I'm going to be and it's where I'm going to stay.
Yeah. And I think for me, again, like a month after mom died, I researched and joined an overdose prevention group in Wake County here locally and dove headfirst into volunteering, like helping to be on a committee and speak at an overdose awareness event. You spoke at an event for your work. So not only did we share our mom's story, but we also got on decently big platforms of a couple years, so it was a couple thousand.
Yeah. It was like with the governor of Tennessee. And then we've done a few news stories since then as well. We really just say yes. If someone wants to talk about our mom, we say yes. And part of that is the selfishness of just wanting to get to talk about her. And
Mhm.
part of that also is the selflessness of what we know it is doing in the world.
But I also think, like, it has opened our eyes too about dealing with trauma. Like, I just started this year seeing a trauma-based therapist and have realized that it's been 5 years, and I did all of the grieving things and saw therapists for grieving and did grief groups and did all these things, and we've pretty much landed on the fact that I have barely scratched the surface of dealing with the trauma of our mom's death. And that's what I've been diving into the past month. And it's hard work to rewire your brain and process something as traumatic as what we went through.
Yeah, and you could probably look back at old memories of growing up and thinking, like, what was going on then that I didn't see then?
I remember like vividly looking at photos. It was the cotton candy one. People called her the cotton candy lady at our school events because she would spin the cotton candy. I remember looking at that picture and like Morgan and I being like, we haven't remembered fun mom since she died.
Yeah.
We had lost that part of her so long ago that it took us at least over a year after her death to be like, "Oh my gosh, this was mom."
It reminds me of, like, real corny metaphor, but, like, in Inside Out, when she goes
Mhm.
to the little girl's memories and they're all yellow and happy and sadness starts touching them all. Like, "Oh my god, the memories are ruined," and that was real for us. Like, every memory was tainted for so long, and there are some I think that still are, like, because there's a reality to them, but there is now an ability to look back and say and even looking at some of these questions, like, what was our relationship with our mom? It was still really positive. There were a lot of hard things that happened for us growing up, but she was an excellent mom, and she laid everything on the table for us every single day, And no amount of sadness or addiction or any sort of whatever emotion comes with this story can change that. And so I think it's taken a lot of work for us to parse through all of that. I do think that's where we are at this point.
When I read articles about when they're talking about statistics for children who've lost a parent to overdose, it sounds very doom and gloom. And if you lose a parent to this, you have a higher chance of mental illness yourself and you also having drug abuse issues. And maybe that's part of the stigma too, that we don't want to be a part of something that sounds scary and bad and negative.
I think too, like, it is okay that this is the worst thing that ever happened to us and that we're still standing.
Yeah.
It can be as terrible as it was and still not take you out. And I think there's part of that's because what are you gonna do? You just gotta keep moving, but part of that is because there really is a way through the grief. And I think I say to a lot of people still working in this field, once you lose someone, like, you end up actually having a lot more grace for them than when someone is alive and, like, actively causing you pain. And so I think, like, we, through her death, were able to, like, reckon with a lot more than we ever would have been able to if she was still alive.
And I do think part of why is because I don't want to not work through things and become really unhealthy and not to say not end up like my mom, but like, again, when people ask me, what do you do to get through it? I am very open in saying, I am in therapy. I love therapy. I have things I'm working through. Like, I was having a conversation with someone who's older and they were like, my generation, they said it proudly. My generation like doesn't believe in therapy. My mom didn't love therapy either. And look how that worked for her. And again, not everyone's story is that dramatic, but I think that's partly why and your journey too, like you said, I don't know how it would have ended up had mom not died.
Yeah, for sure. I was lucky to get out before I had many serious consequences. I don't have a DUI. I never did jail time, never lost a job, but I was certainly headed that direction and could have had all of those consequences based on my behaviors with alcohol. And in some ways, like, was very lucky to be able to have a very clear example of where I could end up
Yeah.
and choose not to go there.
And like I do have three little girls and like we talk all the time about I am aware I don't love the doomsday articles either, but I'm like the fact that one of those three will probably have some sort of mental health disorder or be at risk for substance use disorder. And luckily, I have support systems in place and a sister who is in the field, but it is like a reality.
Yeah. And
Sure.
genetics, right? Things that you can't fight. They're there, but I guess you just have to try to nurture the environment and just do your very best. It's all that you can do. You said therapy was really helpful. Do you have any other advice for any other things that have helped you?
I think you have to be very intentional about your time in early grief. And like a really silly example of that for me, and I tell people this and they like think it's hilarious. Like, I ate cheesecake for breakfast for a solid 3 months. Like, it was hard enough to get out of bed. I wasn't going to make breakfast. And cheesecake, why? Because I like cheesecake. I easily could have had a bagel every morning. I didn't. I wanted cheesecake. But it wasn't a fight I was willing to fight at that point because there were too many other things. And so I think when we look at grieving, we have to be willing to let some things go so that we can get through the process. And if part of that is eating healthy, like, it's okay to let that go. If it's you used to be a person who exercises and you can't get yourself to the gym, that's okay. If it's that my work allowed me to work, we were only supposed to work 1 day from home. They let me work 2 days from home because I just couldn't be in the treatment center seeing all these women get the opportunity that my mom didn't get. Like, that was so hard for me. So I think there's just you have to look at what do you actually have the capacity to address? Because grief is the biggest thing in your life at that moment. something's got to give and you're going to have to let it.
And knowing what you can handle, like grief share through my church drastically changed me and helped me get through the process. Morgan went to one grief share meeting in Nashville because I called and told her how great it was. And she called me and was like, I'm not doing it. I can't do it right
Yeah.
now.
I went to one meeting and was like, I am having a panic attack just thinking about going back. I can't, I don't have it.
Yeah. And so, yeah, it's not a one size fits all. Just
Yeah.
because grief share works for me doesn't mean it's going to work for the next person. For me, being around other people, like in the grass group, brought me so much comfort. For others, it might not have. Like, I was in a group of people feeling like they know what I'm going through even more than grief share, because grief share was this person died from cancer, this person died when they were 90, this person died when they were 15. But the grass group was we all lost someone to substance use. And I found comfort in knowing they knew, of course, not exactly, but pretty close to exactly.
And I think just having space for that difference, like Taylor and I internally grieved differently, but we always grieved together. I don't know if that makes sense. Like she never, after I said I can't do grief share, she never asked me about it again. It wasn't like I'm going to keep pushing you to do this. It wasn't, it just, you have to, people aren't going to grieve the same way as you, but it doesn't mean they're not grieving. And so I think understanding and be able to talk about this is what grief looks like for me right now and understanding, okay, like you're maybe not grieving openly the way I am, but I understand that this is what your internal dialogue is like. And I might not see the grief, but it's there. I think those conversations are really important with whoever you're walking through it with, whether it be a spouse or a sibling or a parent. I think you have to have those conversations.
Yeah. And I feel like you couldn't handle looking at her stuff.
No,
And so I brought all of her stuff, partially because I had a big house and she was living in a one-bedroom apartment. But like I went through all of her photos, all of her trinkets, mailed packages to the people who they belonged to, like all of her friends. I would just like line up piles and I mailed things to the siblings and was like really good about going through all the things, giving them back to people, sending them photos, and I felt like you couldn't do that.
no. And I think that if you couldn't have done it, it would still be in boxes in the garage. It took me a really long time. And even people would text us and be like, oh, I thought about your mom today. And I was like, wow, that's nice. And Taylor would be like, thanks so much. Like, we love you. And I was like, I'm not answering that. So
Yeah.
Taylor definitely, I think, bore a lot of the external burden of our grief and became the sister spokesperson because I couldn't engage with
And I did a
any
lot
of
of the
it.
estate. Again,
Mhm.
partially because I had stopped working, I was home with my firstborn, so I had the time, but I think also I could handle it, and
Yeah.
we were just not.
I did well with the angry stuff, like when the life insurance company was difficult and the medical examiner's office was difficult. I definitely yelled at some people.
Did you get like an autopsy?
We did do an autopsy and a toxicology screen. In her system was fentanyl and Xanax,
But the pills she took were Percocet, so
supposedly. They looked like Percocet.
she was purchasing illegally.
And they were pure fentanyl. There was a detective involved, and Taylor handled all the conversations with the detective. The DEA got involved. There was a lot of really crazy things that happened, but they were able to trace the pathway she used to purchase her drugs
'Cause we were
to.
able to get into her email and sending things to the detective, and he was passing it on to the DEA. But again, that was one of my boundaries. I eventually, and it was my husband who was pointing it out. I would go through her email almost like a detective spy, and then I would be in such a funk that I could not move. Like I would just sit on the couch. And he finally was like, I don't want you looking in her email anymore because you can't function after you do it.
Yeah.
Like
We
I was like, when did she get pills? When was she in our house? Did she get pills delivered here? I think I was just in shock. I can't believe she was ordering pills.
And probably you just wanted to know everything.
A photo from the USPS of the package that killed her. Like I was obsessed.
we called it like the sixth stage of grief is like investigation. The death like this, like you have so many questions and you want so many answers. But ultimately, like, we knew the DEA got involved, but we actually ended up deciding, like, to drop it. They may have done more with the case, but we were like, "We just can't,
Be a
it
part of
doesn't
it.
change anything for us." So I don't actually know. I don't know if they caught somebody, and that was never our goal. Our goal wasn't or I'll speak for myself at least, like, I'm not big into the death by distribution of let's find where the pills came from so we can go after that person. Like, it was more like the police had uncovered things and they wanted to pursue it. But once they didn't really need us anymore, we had to step away because we both were going insane and we really wanted to get into her phone. We didn't know her phone password and we tried every combination we could think of. And the police said, we can unlock it, but it'll take about 10 years, which I was like, first of all, that's not how it works on TV. And I would like answers. But finally, we just were like, you know what? There's probably something on there that would be interesting to learn. There may be some great pictures. And there were some pictures of her and like her great nephew that my cousin was like, I really would love to get those pictures. And we finally were just like, look, like, we're letting the phone go. Like, we just, whatever's on it, we can't worry about it anymore. We kept it probably for 6 or 7 months and then just the investigation died down. Like, that phase ended. And so we let it go.
Yeah, it might be a good thing too, because there could be things on there that
Yeah.
could not be
For
good.
sure. I think the email was bad enough, just, like, being able to see, like, correspondence and
Okay. Oh, yeah.
pictures that you would have gotten probably would not have outweighed the terrible things we would have found, for sure.
Yeah. Morgan, you were saying at your job in the beginning, after your mom passed, it was a little hard because you were seeing other moms like getting the help that they need for their addiction, and it bothered you that your mom couldn't get hers. Are there any things like today that kind of spark anything that gets you like upset and you kind of have to like maybe take a step back?
What an insecure. You get fired up about when you're at work things and they talk about MAT.
Yes, that's not what I was thinking,
Oh,
but yeah, so medication-assisted treatment is particularly for opioids.
Like methadone?
Yeah. And I 100% believe it could have saved my mom's life, and I believe that it would have been a great option for her because she would have been able to stay working, and it helps with the addiction as the disease model because nobody's embarrassed to take blood pressure medication or anything like that. So medication for an addiction disorder helps with that mindset shift. And I do sometimes. I was listening to a story recently a couple months ago and someone was like, yeah, and then my brother found methadone and it saved his life. And like my interior dialogue was like, that must be nice. Like, it's so good and it helps so many people, and I'm a huge proponent of it, but there is always in the back of my mind, she coulda had that, and if she did, she would still be here. It's we can say all the pretty things we want, I think, on this podcast or in any other venue, but at the end of the day, the fact is, like, she died from something preventable, and so I think sometimes when I'm reminded of that, I get in a mood for sure.
In the toxicology report, when my dad passed, there was cocaine and methadone. But my grandpa explained it in a way that my dad accidentally poured himself a glass of vodka and orange juice and didn't know that his friend was a recovering addict and would store his methadone in his orange juice. So when my dad poured vodka and orange juice, he had the methadone in his system and died that way. But I've learned from different things over the years, like that was my dad's methadone. He had an addiction the year before. So he was still on it, a heroin addiction. And, but he didn't die from heroin. Thank God the methadone did help him with that. But then he ended up dying from a different drug, which was just, but yeah, so even that's not like a cure,
And
right?
yeah, it's a good reminder that
Right.
ultimately we can go in circles, but, like, the outcome isn't changing. Like, all these what ifs, there's a time when they're healthy and you have to go through them to process, but there is a point where it's just, you know what, she might have been on MAT and died anyway, and that's also very much a reality.
I think my biggest trigger, to be honest, is people who it hasn't happened in a while, but are just so they'll talk about someone who has a mental health disorder or a substance use disorder to me and say things like they're just making terrible choices or acting like substance use disorder isn't an illness, it's just the willpower thing or whatever. And I use it as an education opportunity and I try to use my words wisely. Internally, I'm always like, you're literally talking about my mom to my face. You're daring to look at me, who how much volunteer work, and actually, I was briefly in the field as well. Someone who knows the research, knows about substance use disorder, and you're telling me things that are just not true.
Yeah.
And so I get defensive sometimes because I'm like, that's not how it works. My mom was sick. Just people who just
Yeah.
don't seem to know their audience, I think.
I think you've inspired me just by saying that because I've been in situations where maybe I'm out with a friend and they run into an acquaintance and say, "Oh, did you hear about so and so? They passed away. Drugs again." I hate that because there's so much more to that story and I never say anything. And in a way, I've felt it's a good thing that I'm not saying anything because I'm not like feeding into that idea that any of that was that person's fault or choice, but not saying anything, that's not really being helpful either.
You
So
can have so many follow-up questions. Like, I'm like, oh, do you know that they weren't diagnosed with some sort of mental health disorder? Or I almost play stupid to just try to catch them. Like, oh, are you sure that they weren't searching for pills in your house because they weren't going to get really dope sick and they physically were not going to be able to not have that pill? I'm not saying taking someone's pill is okay, but
Yeah.
I'm saying like
You won't know the whole story.
be there and just a knowledge of if you know anything about addiction and anything about substance use, that there are consequences for people who are stuck in a cycle and need to get a pill. Or
there's not a person taking drugs out of your medicine cabinet who's proud that's where they are.
I think people know they can't really argue with us.
I think the other thing is we did also lose our dad. And so I think the other thing that we both really hate is being called orphans. It's just a word that for some reason holds a lot of weird context for us. I don't feel like an orphan. I got 27 years with my parents. And when people say that, it seems to really come from a place of like gross pity. I don't know. It's just a weird, it's not addiction related, but I do think that's the one other thing that I'm like, we could maybe not say that to us, actually.
When I said my mom died and my dad, she was like, "Oh my gosh, you're like an orphan." And I was like,
Not actually. So, yeah, I think that's the other one that and it's, I think, harder to explain, but it's I feel like orphan is a word we could be done with as a society, but that's another conversation.
People need to really think before they say stuff
Yeah.
because they don't know how that's gonna come off. Do you have any specific, like, movies or songs or places or things that remind you of your mom?
Yeah, Bruce Springsteen was her absolute favorite
Yeah.
of all time. So, anything Bruce for sure. She was a Hallmark Christmas movie girl. So, the whole, like, Christmas season, all the super cheesy movie.
Do you watch those in memory of her?
I don't, like, I just don't like them.
our poor grandma, actually, that's one of her big things. She's,
Mm.
I will never watch a Hallmark Christmas movie ever again. Like,
Oh,
the thing is, I can't.
I think there's only one movie I feel like I probably will never watch again, and it's the movie Country Strong. It was one of her absolute favorite movies, but it's a story about mental illness
Great.
and substance use,
Oh.
and it ends with a death, and it just I can't like, she loved that movie. It's got a gorgeous soundtrack, but it just so much of it, it just hits way too close to home.
What was the one? Bradley Cooper.
Star is Born.
So Star is Born is actually the last movies. It could have been the last movie I watched with her,
Yeah, that's another one.
which is also weird. Because that by then was like, I mean, she was a few months away from dying from substance
Yeah.
use. And obviously that story was suicide, but there were some similarities and he went to rehab. And we watched that movie together. And I don't know that I could ever watch that. I don't. Besides that, I do think we're mostly in the like kind of happy or happier phase where it's like we listen to Bruce Springsteen and are like,
Well,
"Loved this," and, like, with
Yeah.
my kids, we really try to talk about her, so, like, they know her favorite color's purple, and they know her favorite foods, and they know
there are songs that they call, "Oh, like, this is one of grandma's songs." It's like a One Direction song that, like, she loved, that, like, when it comes on, they know which ones were her favorites.
we make some of her recipes and things like that. I think mostly it's, at least for me as a mom, like, trying to bring her up naturally in everyday life and remember good things and just silly things.
Have you thought about like ever telling your kids like when they get older about what happened to your mom?
We
For
definitely
sure.
will. I think right now, this is the other thing that is like funny, I think, to some people who in the past have tried to argue my mom wasn't sick. Like my kids, what I tell them now was that she was really sick,
Okay.
which is funny because some people in society wouldn't agree with that. So, like, when I explain how my parents died, I essentially tell them, like, mommy's mommy and daddy were both really sick. And they were sick from completely different things. My dad was more physically sick, had an autoimmune disorder, all sorts of health
Yeah.
issues. And mom was mental health and substance use. One of our cousins'
Yeah.
kids, she's 9, but I guess she's like a little adult. She's precious. And basically, one time we were talking about my mom with my cousin who was very close with her, and the daughter came up and was like, "Oh, Aunt Linda." And we were like, "Oh, yeah. Do you miss her and remember her?" And she was like, "Yeah. I remember you guys saying that she died because she took too much of
She's
her
just She took too
medicine."
much medicine, and she died.
Okay.
So
And
that
I
was
was
like
like,
eye opening for
yeah.
us.
And it's that's a developmentally appropriate way to
Yeah.
I think with me being in recovery, like, that's something with our older nieces and nephews on our other side of the family, like, they know what happened to our mom. They know that I'm in recovery. Like, it's not something that's secret. And so it'll be the same way with Taylor's kids as they grow up. If they ask questions, we will tell them,
And I definitely want
you
to tell
know?
them when their little brains are ready.
I think the important thing is, like, when we pass it down, like, it's not gonna be passed down as, "Oh, and we don't tell people about this."
Guys have completely
Oh,
changed the
yeah.
family dynamic because you said
Yeah.
when you were growing up, nobody talked about it. And now look, like you guys are just being completely transparent and open, and this is how it is.
I just imagine, like, they're gonna be in school one day. They're gonna tell their whole class, "Grandma died of an overdose," and Kayla and I are gonna start getting phone calls, and I'm happy to field them. It's not like your kids deserve to know that's a thing too, and that it's a reality of the world we live in right now. And I hope that by the time Taylor's kids are old enough to know the full story, that perhaps we've made a dent in the addiction crisis and things are looking different. But if they're not, like, whether parents like it or not, I consider it a nice little PSA. We're happy to talk to your kids about it if you don't want to. Like, we can be that voice, even maybe if you don't want us to be.
And I can attest to the fact that me not finding out the truth till I was in my late 30s really screwed things
Oh
up
my
for me.
God.
Like when I was 16, my grandpa told me the story about the vodka and the orange juice, which was like, I was like, how do you even know that? It sounds like a movie
Yeah.
scene. Like my grandpa was not there. Like, how does he know? Oh, and he even said that his friend was in the shower. That's why the friend didn't know that he was pouring the orange juice. Like it was like this whole scenario, but I think my grandpa may have created that story to make him feel better about the situation because he was in denial.
And I think probably to protect you too. When a parent dies young, you want, like, the person to grow up remembering all the best parts, and that's not the best part of anybody, even though it's a very real thing. Like, none of us wanna be remembered by any disorder we have.
I was never able to really completely process it because I only knew half of it. When you're like stuck because you only know half the story, you can't like keep moving forward. So I know that they were trying to protect me, but I also think it probably would have been a better idea if I could have known the truth a
God.
sooner. Yeah, but they didn't know what to do, and there's no manual, right? Like
Yeah.
families are just trying to figure it out. Losing a parent suddenly can leave you with many unanswered questions. Is there anything you really wish you could know and but you really won't know or something that you wish you could ask her?
We haven't talked about this in a while, but we used to talk about it a lot.
I think a lot of it was like, did she make that phone call? Did she ask for help? Did she know that she was struggling with addiction?
I think that was a big one for a while because after we read Dope Said and we read, oh, there's
Dreamland?
Baby Dreamland. I guess my question for a while was, do you think she actually knew? Or do you think she was just truly self-medicating and thinking, "I've got this under control. I'm not addicted." Do you
Yeah.
think Yeah, I think that was a big one for a long time was, did she know she was in deep addiction?
I think the other one too was like, did she know about fentanyl? Because fentanyl really became like a hot topic right around when our mom died in 2019. It had been like, it just wasn't as big. So I think we were like, did she know just how dangerous what she was doing? I really think we've let a lot of those things go. I know like the other part of that question was like, is there anything we would want to tell her? And I think for me, like, I would just want her to know how much we loved her and appreciated her and how much she did for us. Like, I don't have any grievances to air. If I could tell her one thing, it would be like, I love you. And that's it.
And I even did that the week before. We didn't have time to get into this, but the week before, her coworkers called me and she had overdosed. And of course, they didn't use that language. I didn't have that language in my repertoire to even know that's what it was. But I raced up to Richmond and asked, "What happened? Why did you have this episode? What medicines are you on? You need to tell me the truth." And then I did go down, like, I sat there in her living room and said, "I love you. Like, you have done so much for us. You are the best mom, the best grandma." Like, I even had that conversation, but still, yeah,
Yeah.
she didn't cave. I still think sometimes, though, I do think, why didn't you tell us?
Yeah.
I do think I would have been like, "You could have told us anything."
Yeah.
But again, I don't think she was ready to either accept that she had a problem or accept help for sure.
Yeah.
And maybe she didn't want to disappoint you guys or
Mhm.
put that on you.
Yeah. I think it is like the classic single mom thing of I'm supposed to be able to do it on myself.
And I do think by the end she was getting really confused, sick. I think her brain was getting fried,
Yeah.
truly.
Which
I
we know about
After
benzos, like it
researching benzo,
crafted her brain.
I think her brain was just
Gone.
leaving. But yeah, and I do think every July, Morgan knows, like, I basically it's the trauma, like, shut down completely, and all those questions do come flooding back, and the biggest question really is not for her, but for me, and every July when my body shuts down, I just go through this, what could we have done? How did we not see it? It was so obvious, but it's only obvious in hindsight.
And it's only obvious with the knowledge of hindsight. Like we did not know, like we just thought our mom had weird sleep patterns. You know what I mean? We thought she was forgetful. We thought she could go from 0 to 60 and be angry and then cry the next minute.
And we thought she had IBS
We
rather
didn't
than withdrawing.
there was an answer for everything, and so it really was just a lack of knowledge, but it is hard to remember that with all that we know at this point, to remember that at that time, like, we did not know anything.
Yeah.
You had said you look back and you think, what could I have done? But I think you're both doing really good things now. So maybe instead of what could I have done, it's what can I do now?
Right.
And I think what you
Trying
both are doing is great and it's so helpful. And thank you. I know that things that you've said is going to help me. I'm not going to keep my mouth shut anymore. When somebody brings something up and I'm going to, yeah, I'm looking forward to doing it. It's not going to be easy. But I'm going to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think being a kid ultimately who loses someone to an overdose, like, we have the responsibility of holding the legacy, and in that, we get to determine what the legacy is, and our mom was not one to keep quiet about many things, and so it's honoring her really when we, for lack of a better term, like, clap back at
Yeah.
people who say things, and so I think none of us asked for that responsibility, but it is, in a weird way, an honor to have it. And so we wanna do the best we can with it for her.
Is there anything else you want to add or share?
I don't think so. Yeah, it's been a great conversation. We
Yeah.
appreciate the opportunity to chat about our mom and our experience and how it's changed us and pushed us forward.
My key takeaway from this conversation with Morgan and Taylor is to speak up. For years, I kept my mouth shut, and I didn't realize that by doing that, I'm adding to the problem of the stigma. The more we can be open about it, maybe it will help others not feel like they have to try so hard to hide it. These two sisters have empowered me, and I hope I can be as vocal as they are one day. Taylor mentioned how going to GRASP meetings helped her. They are a countrywide support group for people who lost someone to substance abuse or addiction. You can visit grasphelp.org for more information. I'm looking for interviewees, and if you or someone you know might be interested in speaking on the show, you can visit kidsofo.com. That's kidsofo.com. Music is by Clavier from Pixabay. The cover art is also from Pixabay. This show is not sponsored by anyone in any way, just me. Take good care of yourself, and thanks again for listening to Kids of Overdose.